barriers does the foundation of reality known as the microverse, as even the atoms themselves are considered entire universes housing multiple celestial bodies such as planets and stars in a molecular chain. If this infinitesimal plane of existence was ever disturbed, all of reality would collapse along with it. Transcending this microscopic plane is the base universe, which is stated to have expanded over 60 trillion light years in half a second, which would actually make the universe over 112 nonillion light years long, with our current universe only being about 98 billion light years in diameter. But this is actually a lowball, as there are several statements implying that the universe is actually infinite in size. However, you can argue that some of these statements are knowledge claims or hyperbolically describing the universe from their perspective, as infinite can just mean very great, but do whatever you want with those scans. Beyond the vastness of the universe is a conceptual space known as the Ori of Worlds, which is comprised of a seemingly infinite amount of universes vibrating in the same dimensional space, with there being universes spawned from every decision and quantum event, which is word for word the many worlds interpretation theory that allows for this infinite metaverse to exist. However, there's multiple scans that indicate that the universes are no longer infinite in number, so take that analogy with a grain of salt. Existing as a parallel to the Ori of Worlds is the Dark Multiverse, which is a twisted and corrupted reality containing evil versions of the many characters that are seen in DC, with the realities in the Dark Multiverse being formed out of the hopes and fears of everyone in the Ori, housing the physical manifestations of their deepest and darkest fears. With the entire cosmology up to this point surmounting to a seemingly infinite number of fourth-dimensional constructs, but in all truth, we've barely gotten started. Existing between and beyond these dimensions is the Bleed, an infinite hyperspace between universes that dwarfs all of creation below it, fundamentally transcending everything to the point that you need fourth-dimensional levels of vision to comprehend this reality, with there being multiple statements of the Bleed being pan-dimensional, which is obviously in context to it containing all the universes. A fifth-dimensional being named Mixie states that the fifth dimension is imagination, and that imagination is the blood of the multiverse existing outside of time and is omnipresent within it, with the same imagination being described as the energy that flows between realms being stated to be everything at once existing backward and forward simultaneously. This is insane because the Bleed fits those descriptions perfectly, with the Bleed being speculated as a higher dimensional fluid, and the House of Heroes, which exists at the center of the Bleed, being stated to be rotating throughout the fifth dimension. So the fifth dimension is the Bleed? That's actually crazy. There's many implications that the fifth dimensional beings are actually just higher dimensional in general. A fifth dimensional imp states that she exists in a mathematical higher dimension, with it being stated that they comprise of a five-dimensional existence. When a being from the three-dimensional universe appears in the fifth dimension, he's completely flat, with it being stated to be a transgeometric plane of existence, with transgeometric referring to higher mathematical dimensions. There's also statements regarding the fact that time in the fifth dimension is endless compared to that of the third. Mr. Mixie is also one of the strongest fifth-dimensional beings in the multiverse, as he's able to casually one-shot the entire fifth dimension, with this level of transcendence qualifying for low complex multiversal on a Turing system. However, there's much more to be said. Let's quickly brush over some of the misconceptions that are used to scale the verse. The first argument stems from the scan, however, taking a look at it, we can already see why it's not valid. It says that 11 dimensions are unquantifiable and exploded to create all things, but this contradicts any current study about 11 dimensions, so we can't apply the complex multiversal tier to this, because if you're gonna use real-life definitions, make sure that they match the studies about 11 dimensions in real-life science, which is what the Turing system is based upon. So this argument really can't be used, and it's likely referring to some other type of dimension, so no, this is not in context to string theory. The next argument stems from this scan, where it also mentions 11 dimensions. However, these dimensions are actually contextualized as universes. We know this because it uses the terms universe and multiverse interchangeably within the same scan, and it depicts multiple parallel worlds, talking about how the multiverse is theoretically speculated as existing layered beyond the 11 known dimensions, which is in context to it being far more than 11 universes. Something being layered doesn't automatically imply that it entails a dimensional difference, and it still doesn't matter because the study in of itself is theoretical, and no, no, this is not in context to string theory either. The next argument has statements regarding 14 dimensions, but it completely lacks any type of context on what aspect of reality it's referring to. So we can't just assume that it's referring to the base universe. And even if you wanted to argue it did exist, it would also exist above realms like the 6th dimension, which is the highest plane of existence, hence nobody would scale to it. Not to mention, it's completely inconsistent within DC, and you can easily argue it's been retconned, much like the Ultimator in the 10th dimension, due to the aforementioned points about the 6th. The next argument comes from this scan talking about 28 dimensions, but it's just talking about 28 known worlds or universes that Metron is traveling through. Dimensions have consistently been referred to as universes in DC, so there's no reason to assume that it's referring to higher spatial dimensions without any evidence. The next scan is pretty interesting because it talks about 196,000 dimensions, but this is actually just a theoretical model of the multiverse created by a computer. And just as I said before, something theoretical is not confirmed and doesn't physically exist. This is supported by the fact that scientists even theorize about whether or not it could exist in a 3-dimensional space, and it's confirmed to be in context to universes and not higher dimensional layers, so overall it's not a usable scan. The next scan in question says parallel worlds and infinite dimensions. The argument is that since it already talks about the existence of parallel worlds, then infinite dimensions must be in context to higher spatial dimensions. However, this argument is bad for multiple reasons. One being that the term dimensions already refers to universes in DC, so statements regarding infinite dimensions is just in context of there being infinite universes. And the existence of parallel worlds can just be in reference to the quality of said universes, as it's affirming the fact that they are parallel to each other, and the quantity of said universes being infinite in number, hence both the quantity and the quality of said universes are addressed. The thing that actually supports this is that they never refer to the parallel worlds themselves as infinite within this scan, so assuming that dimensions would automatically have a distinction to parallel worlds when it's easier to just denote that they mean the same thing would be very disingenuous. And trust me, it's very common in fiction in general to say two words that mean the same thing in the same sentence, mostly just to sound more cinematic and entertaining. Picture me saying there are infinite universes. That sounds pretty dry. But picture me saying this instead: there are parallel worlds and infinite dimensions. That sounds more cinematic, hence more entertaining for the reader, even though the word dimensions and worlds are actually entailing the same thing, which is the concept of parallel universes. Some people try to use Paul Jenkins' statement regarding each universe having infinite dimensions to support this argument. However, Paul Jenkins later on implied that he was just referring to the fact that each of the universes have infinite counterparts, and confirms the authentic intention of it referring to just infinite universes when writing these comics. People actually use this scan where it says worlds beyond worlds to make the conclusion that they are each transcendent of themselves, since the synonym of beyond is transcend. But what people don't understand is that beyond doesn't automatically equate to transcend. For example, if I say that my rooftop is beyond the reaches of little children, I would be correct grammatically speaking, but that doesn't create the situation where my rooftop is dimensionally transcendent over the little children. They are literally depicted as the exact same size in reference to the fact that those worlds are separate from each other, so the argument doesn't logically follow, hence can be dismissed via non sequitur. Another argument is that DC has quantum mechanics, which means that it follows the many worlds interpretation and Tegmark's Type 3 multiverse framework, which is infinite dimensional in nature. But just because you follow some aspects of a theory doesn't mean that you follow all of it. Very specific conditions need to be actualized to allow for infinite degrees of freedom and supersymmetry, which would then entail infinite dimensional spaces, but DC doesn't have any of these conditions, and they simply use the many worlds interpretation to explain the existence of infinite universes. Some people make the argument that theories like implicate order exist in a verse. However, you have to prove that said theory is cosmologically applicable and axiomatically exists in a verse, otherwise it would just remain a theory within the minds of people aware of it, which we cannot assume to be cosmologically real inside of DC, just as we can't assume that theories in our real world are real unless they are proven. This also applies to all other scaling methods that involve the use of theories to scale the verse. It makes no sense because you'd basically be saying that because we think about or theorize about higher dimensions, then they would automatically exist, but this argument falls under a non sequitur. I've seen this argument that DC repeats itself infinitely, with this making a high hyperversal. However, there is no proof that these are all higher dimensions, as it could just be referring to an infinite lower dimensional regression, because the base universe in DC is already confirmed to just be 3-dimensional, which is where the regression actually starts from. And this is probably not even the context at all, as it's just in context of them being trapped inside a comic book, and there was no intention for this to be of a transcendence. And no, you can't ask me to prove that because it's a negative claim. I'm affirming the non-existence of the evidence for the intention of that scan being a dimensional transcendence. Now that we've addressed the misconceptions about the cosmology, let's move on to the next cosmological structure, the speed force. The speed force has been stated to be an extra-dimensional energy that gives the universe motion. This is why speedsters are able to travel through time, because they have access to the speed force which exists outside of it. Depending on the context, extra-dimensional can just mean outside of the universe and not necessarily having any higher dimensional properties. Wonderworld is a place that exists on the speed force wall itself and orbits the Ori at unimaginable speeds. Now, there's an argument that since Wonderworld is stated to be at the furthest perimeter of space and time, then whatever comes after it is not a dimensional construct. However, that completely skips over the fact that the guy in the scan says that whatever is beyond it is unknowable. So he doesn't know whether or not there's space-time beyond it, so you can't just cherry-pick one of his statements and ignore the implications of the other. Now we move on to the next cosmological structure, the time stream. This is essentially the stream of time itself, and it's addressed as the 4th dimension, which is actually stated on multiple occasions to be time itself within DC. It's basically a place where you can access and observe future and past events all at the same time, and it's implied to be a place that speedsters use to access multiple points in time, as it's accessible via the speed force. The time stream is unaffected by the flow of time under confines of 3-dimensional space within the timelines or the universes that you can access from it, and actually exists completely beyond them. This doesn't make the time stream 5D, because as I said earlier, being beyond something doesn't mean that you transcend it, and multiple 3-dimensional beings have existed in the time stream, so we cannot be higher dimensional. Now to the next cosmological structure, the sphere of the gods. Existing outside of all the universes is the kingdom of the gods, a plane of existence created and prominently ruled by magic. Through the collective unconscious, the gods are created from the beliefs of humanity. The sphere of the gods contains multiple realms such as heaven, a land of infinite dreams being infinite in size, and hell, which is the exact opposite of heaven, making it infinite by extension. The dreaming and the nightmare, which is where people go when they dream, are infinite and finite at the same time. Then you have Skyland, which is where all the mythological gods exist, and the underworld, which is the polar opposite of Skyland. And we can't forget the giant planets known as New Genesis and Apocalypse, which are homes to Darkseid and Highfather. But wait, where does it scale? The sphere of the gods is dimensional in nature. It's verbatim stated multiple times. It's also stated to be beyond space and time on multiple occasions, which doesn't mean it's a higher dimension, as I mentioned earlier. This is evident as Darkseid casted shadows on the multiverse as he fell through, and it's logically impossible to cast a shadow onto something unless the object casting said shadow is 3-dimensional and finite. Another thing that supports this is that the monitor's machines could record information across all of time and space, and recorded the creation of the new gods, which implies that they exist within time and space. There's also stated to be space and dimensional rifts within the sphere of the gods, and even years and time periods being recorded inside of it. Even more evidence is when Metron was in the sphere of the gods, he was caught in a space-time vortex and was scared of getting lost between dimensional planes. Now, the God sphere is also stated to be a higher vibrational world, and we know this is not in context of dimensionality due to the aforementioned points about the universes being vibrational worlds, because we actually know that there's worlds with no vibrations in DC. Batman was traveling through several points in time and comes across Zeus, who exists in the God sphere. Vandal Savage was trying to take over the sphere of the gods' temporality using a meteorite in Batman: The Return of Bruce Wayne, and Vandal Savage's attempt to manipulate the God sphere using the meteorite's energy to control time and reshape history occurs throughout the entire miniseries. The storyline spans 6 issues, starting from issue 1 and concluding with issue 6, and he took control of time across all worlds, including the sphere of the gods. There's even more evidence that proves the God sphere is dimensional in nature through the existence of hypertime, which is basically the sum total of all realities, dimensions, and time streams, which includes the God sphere. The physical manifestation of hypertime is a place called the brainfold interior, which is a place between places and a time between times. Hypertime is part of the divine continuum, which is yet another way to prove that these realms are dimensional in nature, as it literally states in a scan that hypertime is under the category of time of the divine continuum, and the God sphere is under the category of space, meaning it's a spatial dimension. And they tell Batman again all of space and time. All of these points just work hand in hand together, and you cannot deny that the God sphere is dimensional in nature. This doesn't now inherently mean that whatever realms come after the divine continuum would not be dimensional in nature, as that would be a non sequitur argument, and there's evidence for them being dimensional in nature, so don't make that argument. I've seen the argument that the multiverse is conceptual, hence making it unbound by spatial temporality, but this argument doesn't hold any weight due to the fact that just because something is called conceptual doesn't necessarily mean it's in reference to abstractions. There's multiple pieces of evidence suggesting that the contents of the divine continuum are dimensional in nature, so conceptual is just being used metaphorically, just like in the case of the orrery. People try to use this scan where Batman states that the gods are powerful living ideas from a kind of Platonic archetypal world to say that it scales them to outer-versal. However, this is only in context of the gods being the embodiment or actualization of subjective concepts like love, hatred, good, evil, etc., which have no external, universally applicable axioms to rest on as regards to space-time, which is the only concept that can scale you to outer-versal, as well as the applications of space-time like gravity and mathematics. And Platonism doesn't actually scale you to outer-versal, as the concepts within Platonism in of itself are subjective concepts. Platonism involves the belief that there are such things as abstract concepts that are non-physical, embodying a specific thing that defines it. For example, if the concept of the color red is destroyed, which in this case is the true form of the color red, which according to Platonism exists externally from space and time, then the color red would instantly cease to exist. However, this is extremely dumb, because he's theorizing the subjective things, and things that have no objective application to reality on a universally applicable level are abstract embodiments of things that already exist. Beauty is subjective, so transcending the Platonic concept of beauty scales absolutely nowhere. The gods are basically the true form of the concept that they represent, just like Darkseid is the embodiment of evil. Not to mention the gods in question are implied to be capable of being killed by the essence of a bullet traveling through time, implying that they are bounded by time, as well as because something traveling back in time can still hit them, which is consistent with the aforementioned points about the sphere of the gods. Now, there is a scan where it states that an angel in what seems to be the Silver City presumably created the concept of dimension and sleep. However, this wouldn't be outer-versal either, because adding sleep next to the concept of dimension, which isn't even plural by the way, makes no sense grammatically speaking, and also proves that it's not in reference to abstract concepts. Also, this scan is probably not even from DC, it's likely from another story called Dark Horse. Superman needed to use a boom tube to adjust his size to be bigger than planets to the point where they are simply specks in order to exist in the God sphere in normal size. And he states that he would be a microbe in the God sphere if he were of a normal size, which implies that the God sphere is in fact not a higher dimension, as there is no infinite difference between it and the normal universe, and it's just a bigger 4D construct. It also states that all mortal universes exist in bubbles in New Genesis. This is also somewhat supporting evidence that the universes in DC are in fact finite in size and not literally infinite, and infinite could just be referencing them being very great in size, in which 122 nonillion light years is very great, as they compare Superman as being a microbe if he was a normal size in the God sphere and the Earth just being a speck. This also implies that the God sphere is not higher than the bleed in terms of dimensionality, which isn't really a problem because the cosmological map doesn't have to depict the exact proportions or placements of the realms, just like the Dragon Ball macrocosm diagram. This is why the God sphere is described by Darkseid as just being outside the physical universes, and even more evidence is that Olympus in the God sphere is stated to be beyond and between time and space, which is just more implications that it's not an infinite difference. The Phantom Zone being boundless just means that it's likely infinite in size, and being a dimension without dimensions does not make it outer-versal, as it's not beyond the concepts of time and space, and it's still contained within a dimensional construct, which is the God sphere. So it's just a zero-dimensional space within the sphere of the gods, which fits the category for a zero-dimensional topological space. There's also a timeless barrier without any distance, which is used to cross into the Phantom Zone, which actually supports it being zero-dimensional. So in all, the God sphere would only be fourth-dimensional, so the fifth dimension or the bleed would actually be superior to the God sphere. There are infinite realms within worlds and infinite limbos within. Honestly, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever when you look at the consistent depiction of the cosmology, and it doesn't imply a difference in dimensionality, as realms within worlds could just be referring to planets within universes, or the microverse within the planets within the universe. Standing at the very edge of creation is a plane of existence known as the monitor sphere. Contrary to popular belief, the monitor sphere does not transcend the multiverse on an infinite level, much like the sphere of the gods. This is due to the fact that ships that are the size of cities in limbo and in the Ori of worlds are considered infinitesimal or microscopic in the monitor sphere. This is why the monitors always refer to the worlds in the Ori as the germ worlds, which means the monitor sphere is still only 4D. Now we move on to limbo, which is essentially a place where forgotten characters go. Now limbo itself is viewed as a tiny disc that the thought robot can hold on his finger in the monitor sphere. It should be noted that limbo is not on the same level of existence as the bleed or the fifth dimension. Limbo is on the same level of existence as the universes with 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, which is supported by the fact that forgotten 3-dimensional characters exist there, and the ships the size of cities in the Ori are also the size of cities in limbo, which implies that they are the same dimensionality. These same exact ships can also travel to limbo and remain the exact same size that they were, even though these ships are stated to sail the higher dimensions in context with traveling through the bleed. It's stated that there's no material thing in limbo to be destroyed and that it's a living memory. However, that doesn't scale any higher than the Ori. In fact, it just means that limbo doesn't necessarily have physical things, which is still contradicted because physical things are there. We know limbo is necessarily dimensional because, for one, quantum superposition and symmetries exist there, which are things that are both contingent upon dimensionality. Also, Superman, Shazam, and Ultraman, who are all 3-dimensional beings, existed there, and you can't argue that they're higher dimensional in existence or out-of-versal, as that will be presupposing the idea that the realm in of itself scales that high, which is what's in question, so that would be a fallacy of circular reasoning. So limbo being non-material is probably just a way to metaphorically describe how things there are forgotten. This is also supported by the fact that Superman's essence would be transferred to a receiver in a higher dimension by Captain Atom, which is in context to when they were in limbo, which, as I explained, is on the same level of existence as the Ori of Worlds. The thought robot is just a really big robot. He's not higher dimensional. I mean, this man has literally been affected by the heat of 10 billion suns. This is why Mr. Mixie states that the multiverse exists in 4 dimensions, and when you add imagination, which is the 5th dimension, this is where the bleed comes into the picture. The bleed exists everywhere because it's the 5th dimension, and Captain Atom is just talking about higher dimensions in context of the fact that Superman and Ultraman are in a smaller 3-dimensional world, which is limbo. It's not saying that the monitor sphere is a transcendent dimension, it's just a metaphorical way to represent it being bigger than the multiverse, to the point where it sees it as microscopic, which is why the monitors keep calling the universes germ worlds, because that's how small they are compared to them. It's stated that the monitors are space angels, and the monitor sphere actually contains space and time inside of it, as it's verbatim stated that scale, space, and time are different and more profound within it, which is in context to it being much bigger than the regular universe. Now, it's also stated that form and meaning surrender to the overvoid here in the monitor sphere, which is the case because the source wall was destroyed before Final Crisis, so there isn't any source wall between the monitor sphere and the overvoid anymore. But this doesn't mean that they are now on the same level of existence, it just means that if anyone wanted to go to the overvoid, nothing would be stopping them. The monitor sphere is just at the edges of existence, and you can fall from the monitor sphere straight into the overvoid, down into the dark multiverse. The monitors are basically vampires who feed on an elixir known as bleed. This is why there are 4 spokes that extend from the monitor sphere into the Ori. Bleed is actually extremely powerful in the multiverse, as even a single drop of bleed was able to free Perpetua from the source wall, which exists in a 6-dimensional space. Which is weird because Mr. Mixie also needs all his power to create a portal to the 6th dimension while taking advantage of a broken source wall, and he only states that he maybe, possibly could create this portal, so he was completely unsure if he was capable of doing it even with the source wall being damaged, which makes sense because Mr. Mixie is a 5th dimensional being, and anything from the source wall and beyond is 6th dimensional and beyond his comprehension. Speaking of 6th dimensional, let's actually talk about the 6th dimension, the final plane of existence. Existing outside of every dimension, world, and plane of existence and universe is the 6th dimension. The 6th dimension is the realm that Perpetua comes from, and Perpetua is stated to be a being from beyond the source wall, wall that came directly from the source, which, if we look at the map, that's the overvoid. The sixth dimension is also stated to be the highest plane of existence in DC, which is also the overvoid. More supporting evidence is that six-dimensional beings like Perpetua, known as the Hand, are tasked with starting new multiverses in the overvoid by the Presence, and they are stated to be extra-dimensional beings. A fifth-dimensional being talks about the sixth dimension being beyond his perception, which makes sense because he's established as a fifth-dimensional being, going by the aforementioned points regarding the fifth dimension and Mr. Mixie, so logically speaking, the sixth dimension would just be a dimensional difference from the fifth. Even more supporting evidence is that the source wall, which is stated to be an infinity beyond infinity and separates the multiverse from the overvoid, is stated to exist in a six-dimensional space by Metron and is stated to be a dimensional gap by Darkseid, which is incredibly consistent with the aforementioned points. Another thing that proves it is that years literally pass in the sixth dimension, and a fraction of the source is stated to reveal itself on a map of all of space and time. Now, I know people use this scan to say that the concepts of past, present, and future mean nothing to Metron, to say that he's outer. However, he makes it clear that he's not talking about abstract concepts, but rather the idea of past or future doesn't have much meaning for him, as he doesn't have any worries about the future or the past, which is why he talks about it having meaning only to the Justice League. And something lacking meaning to you does not imply that you scale above it. Another thing is the fact that the Chronicler, a being from the overvoid, rips through the fabric of space-time from the overvoid to enter into the multiverse, which means that space-time does exist in the overvoid. Another implication is that a powerful force locked inside the source wall flew through space and time towards the Earth. And another one is that Perpetua talks about the fourth dimension, which is time, in context to them being in the sixth, clearly implying that she's actually 6D, which is even supported by the fact that Cosmic Raptor imprisoned her in the source wall, which exists in a six-dimensional space for defying the will of the Presence. So Perpetua, as well as the Hands and the Chronicler, are all low six-dimensional beings, and I say low because there's no proof they can destroy the overvoid and just exist here, so they would just scale to low 6D, just as we don't scale to infinite 3D or 4D because we live in a 3D universe. The one who actually scales to the whole place is the strongest being in DC, the Presence, who contains all of DC in his mind, with his mind being the overvoid itself. Now, people try to use this scan where it states that all things are being layered onto themselves endlessly to say there would be an infinite hierarchy, but that makes no sense because an infinite hierarchy is already infinite. But this implies that the process is still taking place continuously, so it's not an infinite hierarchy. Also, like I said earlier, something being layered doesn't automatically imply a difference in dimensionality. At this point, the whole DC cosmology would accurately scale to six-dimensional or low-complex multiversal, which is not weak in any regard, but just not as strong as people make it out to be. This is the most accurate depiction of the DC cosmology you will ever find, and people who are gonna disagree with this or gonna have a problem with it are most likely salty comic fans who don't want to accept the fact that the WANK scales don't make any sense whatsoever. Now for some honorable mentions, I'll be debunking some scans people use to WANK Superman. The first argument is that concepts like weight, distance, temperature, and even space-time have largely lost their meaning to him, making him outerversal, but this doesn't scale to outer because it mentions space-time and distance within the same sentence, which are both entailing the exact same thing, so it's a pretty redundant repetition. And it also mentions temperature and weight as a part of those concepts, which makes it clear that it's not a reference to abstract concepts, hence they cannot be outer. He says they have largely lost their meaning to him, but they would need to completely lose meaning to him for it to be outerversal. And not just losing meaning, but losing value to him completely, because something losing meaning to you doesn't imply that you scale above it. That's a non sequitur argument. He literally implies that space-time and distance still have meaning to him within the same scan. Damn, all that and he still got bodied by a kaiju named Godzilla. The context of the situation is that Lex Luthor teleports Superman to another galaxy, through which he comes back in a short amount of time, seemingly through a portal, which supports the idea that Superman actually accelerates and then becomes so fast that he warps space-time and then can actually travel extreme distances very quickly. This actually ties into the next scan where it's stated that he has speed that defies the common concept of space and time, and the fact that it says common concepts means it's just in reference to mental ideas and not abstract concepts. It states that Superman uses special warps in order to travel those extreme distances, so he accelerates for a period of time till he reaches a speed beyond the speed of light, where he's able to warp space-time and cross the bonds of infinity. This is why Superman's casual speed feats don't really sum up to that of the speed of light, and he has to accelerate for a long period of time before actually reaching the the speed of light and surpassing it. The feat of Superman punching a World Forger is taken heavily out of context because, for one, the World Forger's powers gradually weaken when he's within the multiverse for too long, and his powers are greatly diminished when he's within the multiverse. And he literally agrees with Batman to align multiple stars so Superman can pass through them and amp himself in order to damage him. Superman consistently ranges in a multi-solar system level to multi-galactic ranges with faster than sound speeds, and sometimes when he's amped, he can reach these insanely high levels. He also has multiple anti-feats like being affected by vegetables and being spanked by daddy. Alright, I'm just joking. So in the end, DC is an incredibly vast and complex cosmology, but hopefully I've been able to show you the actual levels and placements of the cosmological structures in the multiverse. You don't have to be universal or boundless before you're considered extremely powerful or strong. It's better to take things as they are rather than taking them out of context just to satisfy your character bias. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, and if you learned something new, please comment down your thoughts in the comment section below, but no debating in the comment section because nobody is reading all that. Just join my Discord server if you want to debate people, and I'm serious, if I see any mega long comments, I'm deleting them. You really can't disagree with this video because everything is just verbatim stated from the comics themselves, and if you still think DC is outer after watching this, you're a lost cause. Just cope, bro. Stay tuned because I'm coming out with a Marvel scale / debunk very soon. So at the end of the day, DC may be extremely powerful, but they're definitely not Goku-versal.